I think we better just move to the closing, because we want to end by 4, and that's 10 minutes.
Yeah,
so
we'll give you time, but if you
So
join me
you
in
may
thanking
have
all of our
Okay.
panel, that would be fantastic.
Okay.
So I sat up here so we could fire away and not have to change tables or anything, but let me take 5 minutes to sort of pick up a few themes that came up through the day. And I know you have many more, and we all see it in different ways. But I'm really glad Chris brought up the Horizon thing. This is this morning's paper, and the last 2 days headline news has been about the Horizons disaster, and it's been called the broadest miscarriage of justice in UK history, which was up to 900 sub-postmasters pursued for fraud or fraudulent use of funds by the post office, when it was potentially a combination of computer errors and Fujitsu and the post office and mismanagement and so forth. But we can't really lose this opportunity as an importance of history, of historical study. It began in 1995 when they rolled out this. And from 1999 on, they began to see the problems with this. And it's only now that it's become a very important aspect and well-known and the public is aware of. And what is it? It was one of the themes of the this was storytelling, the importance of storytelling. And so this dramatization of Mr. Bates versus the post office has been showing on ITV in the UK. And people from abroad may not know about this, but it's absolutely riveting and it's touching. And from now, the UK is totally focused on trying to deal with what happened, why are not up to 900 people pursued, and there was actually suicides, mental problems that were resulting, divorces and so forth that resulted from this, and is only now really being addressed by top level management and government. So historically, several people in this room were in the PIC program back in the 1990s. In 1995, we published a paper called Computer Power in Human Limits, and it was looking at IT disasters. And it said we should study these. We looked at the London ambulance routing disaster. We looked at the USS Vincennes shooting down an Iranian domestic airliner because they mistook it for a military airline. And we had historical studies of exactly those IT disasters and tried to learn about what caused them and so forth. And almost all of them came up with multiple reasons. There's no single one explanation for any of these. It's because multiple things go wrong. But historical looks at case studies like the IT Horizon disaster could really help prevent these things from happening in the future. We'll have a ton of material. We should have AIT should say, okay, let's explain this to people and take responsibility for showing who is responsible for this. Just 4 points and about 30 seconds a point. One is I love the Brian Sudlow's use of the term hindsight. Everybody talks about hindsight in a pejorative way, like, oh well, we can say that with hindsight. Well, hindsight, you used it in a positive way. I mean, this is history. We can, hindsight is a great term that we don't use enough. It's a positive, we use foresight all the time in a very positive sense, but why not use hindsight in that way? Secondly, the social implications. I started studying as a political scientist. I think I'm the only political scientist in the room, but I started studying the social and political implications of computing in 1974. And from almost always, it was speculative. The social implications would be this, would be that. And now we can look back at the impacts actually that have occurred over time with women, with work, with accessibility. And so we know that this is not happening, or this is happening in ways that we did not predict and so forth. So we can look at the social implications now from a historical perspective in a much more rigorous and interesting way than we could before. Third, the gaps, and everybody's mentioned the gaps in what we know and the historical missing data and the missing archives and the disconnected archives. I spoke in the early 2000s to a group of historians at Oxford. They're all historians, and I was an internet studies person, but I tried to get them really worried about the internet, and we're not saving this material, and it's being lost, and you won't know the history. And all the historians said, Bill, that's history. This is what historians do. We dig up, we dig into it. I said, nothing's easily done. That's our work. That's why you hire us to do these things. We work with missing data all the time and so forth. The hype, people have mentioned the hype, and I think the hype and this, maligning innovations, the hype around innovations, is all of these smart cities have had these ebbs and flows of interest and AI likewise, and we forget innovation all the time. I coined the term innovation amnesia because people forget that, video conferencing has been invented and failed about 20 times and then now it's successful, but hype has a real value. Hype, you don't get people interested in stuff like this unless there's some hype and excitement about. When I started as I'm an emeritus professor at University of Southern California, but I came to the Oxford to be the founding director of the Oxford Internet Institute and the first professor of internet studies at Oxford. And my colleagues at Oxford came up to me and said, Bill, what are you going to do in a couple of years? Because the internet's not going to be here. But anyway, so they thought it was all hype, that it wasn't. I mean, everything's going to be more and more networked. So it wasn't CB radio, or it wasn't something like that. So, but hype has a real social role to play. Just a small point about how people were mentioning about the focus on applications rather than technology. And I do think that the internet was driven by the effort to share computing resources. So you could use a computer anywhere in the world from wherever you were. And that the web was driven by sharing documents, so that at CERN they could have a global project and share the same documents. So that it was application driven. And I think that new forms of AI based on large language models were really driven by the efforts to read the web, by military defense and other. How do we read these billions of things going on? And it's got to be automated, and we've got to understand and machine cognition has to happen. And so understanding those applications. And finally, I think the diversity of this group was just incredible. I mean, everybody said how I got into this from different angles, and it sort of happened into the area of studying the history of the internet and IT. It made it a very interesting conversation because of that. And I mean, it's not, I wasn't just listening to a bunch of political scientists presenting, and it was, I think one of the purposes of us putting this together was to help us network with other people who were interested in the history of the internet and IT. And I think hopefully if we do by doing this and maybe future events, we can network people who are not necessarily expected to be in the same room or expected to have similar interests. So I thank the archive for doing this, and I'll turn this over to Mr. Norton to close.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, so you can see.
I promised no more than 5 minutes, so thank you, Bill. I'm painfully aware that I'm the only thing standing between all of you and drinks, so I will be brief. So back in 1948, Winston Churchill pointed out to the House of Commons that, and I quote, Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. He was paraphrasing, in fact, George Santayana from his Life of Reason, written in 1905, who noted that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. I think this thought provides the key reason for why the whole Archives of IT project and our conference today are both timely and I think very important. There are so many lessons learned over the last 70 years that later practitioners are in danger of never having known, let alone forgetting. Each generation of computing, mainframe, mini computer, personal computer, embedded systems, cloud, seems to have to relearn the need for things like careful systems analysis and planning, let alone the need for the use of, for example, formal methods in software development. I was there at the beginning of the packet switching revolution that led via ARPANET and BT's experimental packet switch service and packet switch service to the internet we know today. We gave little, if any, consideration to security. We were hell-bent on providing the maximum access and interoperability. We certainly paid the price for that in spam and spoofing. We're in danger of repeating that pattern in the social and societal impacts of information and communication technologies. Our technologies continue to follow an exponential curve of growth in price performance and thus capability. Sensible managed social diffusion and adoption remains a steadfastly linear process, lagging, I would argue, dramatically. We didn't fully comprehend what we were unleashing with social networks and social media. Are we about to face exactly the same challenges with generative machine learning tools like ChatGPT and Bard? You'll understand from this preamble that I firmly believe in the great value of the Archives of IT. John, Bill, Tom, and the whole team are doing a great job in capturing the lessons and experience of the past. Even more importantly, they're pioneering disseminating that knowledge into our schools and our universities. Dead expertise, I would argue, is of limited value. It must be put back to work. How many of our children know of the key role the UK has played in the development of ICT? The role, for example, of Dr. Donald Davis, who I was honoured to work with at the National Physical Laboratory, who arguably established the concept of packet switching and certainly pioneered its first implementations in this country. Or the role of the Royal Signals and Radar Establishment, RSRE, at Malvern, in developing liquid crystal displays. They may know of Tim Berners-Lee and his contribution to the World Wide Web, but what of his parents? His father, Conway Berners-Lee, helped John Pinkerton develop the Ferranti Mark I, first commercially built computer, and his mother, Mary Lee Woods, was arguably the first computer programmer at Ferranti's.
And she was a lady.
Absolutely. That would help. I would also argue, by the way, not on script, that as I recall, from work we did in BCS many years ago, at the start of the computing era, it was more like 50-50. We managed to kill it. Yeah. In that working, how many of us know of the pioneering work of JANET, the Joint Academic Network, and its European-wide equivalent, which I'll pronounce badly, GIANT, all the work on data communications protocols carried out in the 1980s by the UK universities, the so-called coloured books. I think it's important that we share role models and we share achievements. I'd like to end by posing you all some questions. We can continue over drinks. What more does the archive project need to do? How can we make better use of the archive material we have? How can we reach out to schools, colleges, universities? Should we run further forums, such as today? Anyway, let's pick up those questions over drinks. But as I close, will you please join me in thanking the whole team who worked so hard to put on today's forum, and many thanks to you all, both here and online, for joining us. Thank you.